Hey, that's unfair. Are we really doing everything wrong? Well, YouTube seems to say so. So, is this another video that is going to tell you how wrong you are? Mm, um, uh, well, yes, but not entirely. Would you care to go ahead? So, here we are. We are going to be talking about how we are doing things wrong. But while doing that, we're going to be talking about how to make things better. Now, that's a way to approach things, isn't it? So, let's get on with it as quickly as we can. So let's begin. In this video, we're going to be looking at four things. The first thing is obviously how vocabulary works, in the sense that what is the process in which our mind learns vocabulary. We are then going to compare it with how we learn, the difference between how vocabulary works versus how we learn. This is where our tiny mistakes that cost us a lot happen. Then we're going to be talking about how we are supposed to be learning vocabulary. And towards the end, we are going to talk about a fully free app that we found, which is absolutely awesome. And what do we mean by fully free? There are no advertisements. The app doesn't take away your data. The app doesn't take away your privacy. The app doesn't need any permissions. It's an honest to goodness free app. So let's begin at the beginning. How does vocabulary work? If you're a person that can count, you can see that there are 6 bars that are there. So there are 6 steps to how vocabulary works. Now, what is the first step? The first step is obviously where you know the meaning of a particular word. Then we try to read sentences where the word is and try and figure out, or try and make sure that the meaning that we know of the word is correct. And then we try to use the word while we are speaking. And then we try and understand the context in which the word appears. Finally, we move on where we try and use the different forms of that particular word. And once we are through with these 5 steps, we try and make sure that we attain full flexibility. Now, this is the actual learning process. But in our hurry to learn more and learn a lot, we usually skip the most important steps in the process. So let's first look at each of these steps and what it means. And then while looking at each of these steps, we'll also look at whether we take the step into consideration while we are actually learning or not. And if we are not, how we are supposed to take it into consideration. So let's move to step number 2, figuring out how we learn. Let's start with step number 1. What is step number 1? Step number 1 is very obviously knowing the meaning. So, how do we know the meaning? Let's start with a simple word, a word which we all know, the word stem. So when we first learn the word stem, we usually associate the word with other words which have the same meaning. So let's say when we look at the word stem, we say a stem is a branch, the stem is the trunk of a tree, and so on and so forth. So that is step number 1. And this is what we all do. There's no problem with it. Now, what next? The second step is obviously reading sentences. Once we are familiar with the meaning of the word, we look at sentences that reassert the meaning in our minds. So, continuing with the word stem, let's look at a sentence. A stem allows the flow of minerals and nutrients to all parts of a plant. We are making associations here. We are looking at the word stem and then we are reading it within a sentence that tells us again what the word actually is. This is also something that all of us do. Then comes step number 3, word use, where now that we know the meaning of the word, we try to use it and form sentences. So let's look at the 3 sentences that we have here. So a stem, suppose the leaves of the plant. A stem has several functions. The stem of the tobacco pipe broke. Now here we have used the word stem in a slightly different way. It still, however, conveys more or less the same meaning. Unfortunately for us, this is where our learning stops, and this is where our learning actually begins. So what do we do? Now let's proceed to step number 4. Step 4 is where everything starts happening. Now that our mind has learnt the word, it is trying to do creative things with that word. It is seeking that word out, and it is trying to see if that word can be used in any other context. Now let's take the same word again. Let's look at the word STEM. Now it has been put in orange to tell you that this is where you wait and watch and be very, very careful. Let's look at a couple of sentences. The school took measures to stem cheating. Okay, we've obviously made a mistake here. The school took measures to stem cheating. Now, once you look at this sentence, you automatically know that this is not the meaning that we know. There is something terribly wrong. So, what does the word stem mean here? Now, before we get to that, let's look at the next sentence. My father was busy stemming apples. Even here, we are looking at a different form of the word. Stemming apples? What do you mean by stemming apples? Now, in both these contexts, the word stem does not fit into the meaning that we have associated to that particular word. So once we see a particular word in a slightly different context, our mind starts thinking, our mind starts applying the knowledge that we already have and tries to use it in a different context, and that is where learning begins. Learning is not memorizing, learning is applying thought. So let's apply thought here. And how do we work these things out? The school took measures to do something to cheating. Now you automatically understand the context. The school is doing something to cheating. Now what would schools do to cheating? Would schools encourage cheating? Obviously not. Schools would like to stop cheating. So from this particular context, you know that the meaning of the word stem is to stop. But in the next sentence, my father was busy stemming apples. What does this mean? Now for this, you'd have to go back to a dictionary and figure out what that word means. So how do we start figuring things out? Now to figure things out, we need to do something which would take us into the next step. Step number 5 is knowing word forms. Now, what do you mean by knowing word forms? Instead of using the word in the only context that we are aware of, we try and actively figure out and try and encounter as many contexts as possible wherein the word has been used differently. So if you look at the word stem can be used obviously as a noun in terms of the stem relating to a tree or a plant where it is a noun. Then the word stem can be used as a verb wherein we are talking about the school trying to stem cheating, which means to stop. Now, the same verb can be used in the past tense, saying stemmed, or it can be used in the present continuous tense, stemming. Now, the word stemming and the word stemmed have two completely different meanings. You should actually take a look at a dictionary, but let me tell you, stemmed means to originate, to start from. Stemming means, again, to remove the stems. When the father was busy stemming apples, it means that the father was removing the stems of the apples. And we have the word stemmed as an adjective. Now, what does an adjective do? An adjective describes a noun. So you should be able to figure out how to use this word stem in many word forms and in as many parts of speech as possible. And how do we do that? We do that by making sentences, and that would be step number 6. The final part of learning is when we try our best to make sentences in as many different ways as possible. And that will be the fundamental concept of the final step of learning, which is acquiring full flexibility. What do you mean by full flexibility? Like we said earlier, our ability to make sentences in as many different contexts as possible. Let's take a look at a few sentences again with the word stem. So let's look at sentence number 1. The stem of a plant. This we are already familiar with. Then stem, the flow. We are using it as a verb to stop the flow. The problems stemmed from ignorance. The problems originated from ignorance. Here we are using the word stemmed as a verb, but it is in the past tense. And then look at the last sentence. Wine is served in stemmed glasses. This word stemmed is describing how the glasses are. And how are the glasses? They're stemmed. They have stems like wine glasses. If you're not really familiar with how a wine glass looks, you could type down wine in any of your phone keyboards and you'd see a small glass with a stem underneath it. That is a stemmed glass. And once you're able to use the word in multiple contexts like these, you can be said to have achieved full flexibility with that particular word. This is the final step in the learning process. So if you want to make sure that you've learned a word, you must ensure that you know the part of speech of that particular word, what are the different ways in which that the word could be used, and how are the meanings different under each part of speech. These are the 3 questions that you always should ask yourself. So where do we go from here? Obviously the question is, yeah, this is all fine, you've told us all these steps to learn, blah 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 blah, but how do we get on with learning? Now that is where we've found a wonderful app which is fully free. Now how does the app work? Just wait and watch a couple of seconds ahead, and we're going to tell you how this app works and why we are in love with this particular app. Okay, like we promised, we are going to talk about an app that we really love. What is that app called? It is called DYKTW Vocabulary. And why do we love this app? Let's take a quick peek into what it does. So once we open the app up, there's a nice PyFX cube that is happening, and then we have all the levels that are given here, and the levels are really fun. Basic says, it says something interesting about each of those levels. So basic says enough for you to walk, and there's a socks, and then you move on to a shoe, a bicycle, a scooter, so on and so forth. Now the next part is the app itself, the things in the app itself. Let's not look at the very basic words. Let's look at something slightly more advanced than basic ones. So let's start here. So you look at a word like this. Now in here, what usually happens is you're presented with a word, and beneath the word is the part of speech, fathom, as a noun. Now what is the meaning of the word fathom as a noun? Now since it's a noun, it is a unit of measure. So you tap on that, and then bingo, you have the right answer. And along with the answer, you also have a sentence that uses the word fathom. Let's go further. We have the word radical. Radical is being used as an adjective. Now what does radical as an adjective mean? One of the meanings of the word radical here is absolute. I'm hoping I'm right here. So yes, I am. And then you move on to the word labor. Now this is tricky. If you look at the word labor, we know labor and we are looking at it as a noun. So are we talking about laborers or are we talking about something else? If you look at the answers here, we know that the only possible answer is the act of giving birth. So we are looking at words from a slightly different perspective. We are also looking at words from the point of view of the part of speech that they belong to. So let's say labor is an act of giving birth. Are we right? Yes, she was in labor for 2 hours. And what does it say next? Warm. Now what do you mean by warm as an adjective? Well, now the one meaning of the word warm we have is warm water, but here if you look at it, nothing of that sort is being presented. But what is the other meaning? You have a warm welcome, so naturally the answer is affectionate. So what does it mean? Let's see. Warm is affectionate, and then he welcomed me with a warm smile. Warm means compassionate, sincere, and loving. So this is what the app does. And for each level you have your progress bars, and then it allows you to take a quiz straight away, where you can see whether your answers, how many of the answers are right or wrong. And it can go all the way up to superhero, wherein the words are pretty darn difficult. If you look at the words here, and let's see, nacreous. Now what does a word like this mean? So let's take a look. Nacreous, I'm guessing, is iridescent. Wow, I'm really good at vocabulary, aren't I? Or am I just cheating? Well, I'll leave that for you to decide. So take a look at this app. We'll leave a link for the app in the description below. And if you have any questions, obviously you can leave your questions in the comments below, and we'll try our best to answer them as early and as completely as we can. Links to more tests, apps, and everything are in the description below. And as always, remember, search for First Academy, or simply go to www.firstacademy.in. And if you could give a thumbs up and subscribe, we'd be really delighted. But then nothing is a compulsion. See you again in the next one.